I thought that semicolons was out.
No, they're fine. They're not out, they're just optional.
Yeah, so this would work without the semicolons.
Yeah. Yeah, I tend to write semicolons.
You're an old guy.
Well, I disagree on it, but that's a different story.
You think they should be there?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think best practice would dictate that they be there, but
I think they should be there, but for the same reason we have problems in JavaScript with it.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, if you put them in, it's an option, but if you put them in, then you're fine. But I tend to put parentheses in places that other people may not as well. But the so yeah, so this is a little more complex one. Here the idea is, okay, let's just multiply as many numbers as they give us. You know, let's make this work with. We want to multiply 10 numbers. We're going to multiply. Well, I've at the bottom 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You know, we're just going to multiply. So here in the signature at the end, we put in an ellipsis. It's actually 3 periods, not an ellipsis character. But and that says, give me, you know, it's like assign the first parameter to the local x, but go ahead and give me all the rest of the parameters. And they show up in a local variable that's called rest. And there is a way to rename that if you actually have a parameter called rest. But, so in our code, I set an output variable called out, and then I iterate through rest, performing the multiplication, and return the value. So hopefully that works. But yeah, so that's just normally in most tags you're going to know what the parameters are, but there are good reasons. This is a fairly good reason to take a variable number of parameters. So like inline is a great example of a tag that must take a variable number of parameters.
Could you specify any amount to be numeric? Could you have ... numeric?
No. No, you need, when you go to rest, you need to, if you need to ensure that those are a certain type, you have to do that yourself. Yeah, so yeah, so an empty signature, we already saw, but it actually requires that the tag be called with no parameters. Lasso 8.5 is pretty loose about this. It will simply allow the parameters to be ignored if you pass a bunch. So we can't actually call pi with a string parameter. That's going to be an error. We can call it with an empty parens or with no parens.
But we could define it as pi ...
Yeah, and then it would take, yeah, I think that's the next example. Yeah, pi ... This is the most, no. Yeah. This is the most, this says I'll take anything. And yeah.
And ignore it.
Yeah, and we can ignore it. In this case, we're ignoring it. But yeah. So yeah. But yeah, Lasso 9 makes it, these kind of definitions make it easier to really lock down the behavior of your tag and really know how it's going to be called. Let's see, I just mentioned the return value. It's probably better way to write these. Oh yeah, I just wanted to mention, I remember I did, the return value, return is not strictly a tag, just as define is not really a tag. Define is a language construct, and return is a language construct. So define, the expression, like, there aren't, it isn't defined parenthesis my tag, it's defined space, and then the signature. It's a different kind of expression. Anyway, return is actually the same. You can use the parentheses around on return, but you don't need them. So you'll see this where return is just a it's return space and then the value. All right, so now I'm going to talk about defining types real quick, because you've all got tags, right? Yeah, so types are defined in Lasso 9, again, using define. And this is exactly the same syntax as we used, or really similar syntax to how we define the tag. We define the name of the type, association operator, and then we have the keyword type, and then the implementation or the definition of the type, which is always in curly brackets. And and then there's a structure within the curly brackets. And there are several, there's even a few more than this, but there'll be several different sections, which we'll see. There's a data section, public section, a private section, parent section. It can also be traits and things. So I'm going to just show, here's a simple type that you might find called counter. And counter has I'll walk through the different parts, but it has a data section and a number of public tags. So data is defining a member variable of this type. Every time you create a counter, it will also have this member variable. So in Lasso 8.5, this was you use the local tag within the defined type. This is exactly the same as that. We can use the same signature as we used we use essentially kind of signature here to specify a constraint on our member variable. Incidentally, when you create a local, you can say, like if we do local temp, we can say local temp : integer and create a local that has a type constraint as well. Those can be used throughout Lasso. So anyway, yeah, so this is a counter, so we have a member variable which will hold our count, and it defaults to 0. The next part is the creator. Just the same as in Lasso 8.5, the creator is called onCreate. And this is where the distinction between a tag and a type starts to get starts to kind of you start to see what the distinction is. Counter is a tag that returns a type instance, and when we return a new type instance, we run its creator on create. So if we want to call counter, our creator requires a parameter x, which has to be an integer. So when we call the tag counter, we have to call it with a parameter, with an integer parameter. And it's just a little, it's like because the type inherits the requirements of its creator. So I'll have an example of calling this in a minute, but we have to call counter with a 1 or 0 as its parameter. And so what we do, what the creator does, is the code on the side there in the curly brackets, in bold, it sets its local member variable to the parameter that was passed in. So we're just going to store the parameter x in the member variable count. And this is where we get to the dot syntax that some people have seen. In Lasso 9, dot is a shortcut for self. So just as, actually I was so just as $x is a shortcut for local x. $x is a shortcut for variable x. Dot x would be a shortcut for self x. So it's just another shortcut, and just in type definitions you use self all the time, and so this really shortens up the code a lot. Conceptually, dot, if you're used at all to the command line, it's similar to the current directory, and there's also a shortcut dot, which references the parent, which you also use quite a bit when you're doing type definitions, which is analogous to the parent directory.